Her voice was a steel wire of certainty as she spoke into the phone. "I'm reporting a suspicious individual. There's a young man loitering in my yard, and he doesn't belong here." Soon, the serene afternoon of the quiet, tree-lined street was shattered by the piercing blue and red of police lights. Sirens wailed, cutting through the calm and drawing curious neighbors to their windows. At the center of the commotion stood 12-year-old Leo Jackson. He was a slight boy, dwarfed by the police car next to him, his face pale and his hands trembling around the basketball. He clutched to his chest. This is where it all began. Leo and his mother had recently moved to the neighborhood. He was a good kid, polite, bright, and absolutely obsessed with basketball. The worn leather of the ball was practically an extension of his own hands. That afternoon, he was practicing his dribbling in his driveway, just as he did every day. Then, it happened. The ball took a rogue bounce off a crack in the pavement, escaping his control and rolling across the street. Laughing at his own clumsiness, Leo chased after it as it came to a gentle stop on the perfectly manicured lawn of a neighbor's yard. To him, it was a simple mistake, easily fixed. He walked to the edge of the property and called out, "Hello, excuse me." "My ball rolled into your yard." Silence. No one answered. Leo hesitated. The last thing he wanted was to cause trouble. He glanced around, checking if anyone was watching. Seeing no one, he took a few quick steps onto the grass to retrieve his ball. What Leo didn't know was that he was being watched. From her window, Mrs. Gable's eyes were narrowed, fixed on him. To her, this wasn't an innocent boy retrieving a toy. It was something sinister. Her mind, a fertile ground for suspicion, began to race. Who is that kid? Why is he on my property? Without a second thought, she snatched her phone and dialed 911. "Hello, police. There's a black kid causing trouble in my yard," she said, her voice sharp and steady. "He looks very suspicious. You need to send someone immediately." By the time Leo had his ball and was turning to leave, the wail of sirens sliced through the air, growing louder with each passing second. He spun around to see a patrol car screeching to a halt at the curb. Two officers emerged, their faces stern and serious. For a moment, Leo was frozen in confusion. Why are they here? The officers approached him, their voices calm but firm. "Can you tell us what you're doing on this property, son?" one asked. Leo hugged his basketball tighter. "I just came to get my ball," he stammered. Before he could explain further, Mrs. Gable stormed out of her house, pointing a finger at him. "That's him?" she declared loudly. "He's been casing the place all afternoon. I don't care what excuse he gives you, that boy does not belong here." The officers exchanged a look. One turned back to Leo. "Son, is that true? Were you trespassing?" Leo's eyes darted down to his basketball. His voice was barely a whisper. "No, sir, I wasn't trespassing. My ball just rolled into her yard." Mrs. Gable folded her arms, her expression smug. "Oh, sure," she sneered. "That's how it always starts. First, it's a ball. Next thing you know, they're scoping out houses, looking for something to steal." The weight of her words felt like a physical blow. A cold knot of fear tightened in Leo's stomach. He felt the eyes of the officers, the neighbors peering from behind their curtains, and the piercing gaze of Mrs. Gable. He opened his mouth to defend himself, but the words wouldn't come. "Why weren't you in your own yard, son?" The officer pressed, his tone now laced with suspicion. "I told you," Mrs. Gable chimed in. "I knew he was up to no good. Leo was just a boy with a basketball, but in that moment, he was being treated like a hardened criminal." Pressured by Mrs. Gable's insistent accusations, the officer made a decision. He told Leo he needed to come with them for questioning. Leo didn't fight or argue, but as they led him toward the car, his voice shook as he made one request. "Can I please call my mom?" What Mrs. Gable didn't know, and what the officers couldn't have possibly guessed, was that Leo's mother wasn't just any parent. She was Governor Diana Hayes, the most powerful and respected official in the entire state. The phone rang in her office. When she heard Leo's trembling voice recount the story, A switch flipped. She didn't shout, she acted. She made one call, then another. Within minutes, a motorcade was racing toward the neighborhood. It started with a low rumble, then the piercing sound of more sirens. But this time, it wasn't one police car. It was a fleet of black SUVs, barreling down the street, lights flashing, engines roaring. Mrs. Gable turned, her face twisting in confusion. What on earth was happening now? As the lead SUV glided to a stop, the door opened, and Governor Diana Hayes stepped out. She moved with an unhurried grace that commanded attention. Her eyes scanned the scene. The officers, the neighbors, Mrs. Gable, before finally resting on her son, Leo. Her voice, when she spoke, was calm, but it had an edge that cut through the tension like a razor. What seems to be the problem here? The officers stammered. Governor Hayes. One managed, his professionalism suddenly returning. We received a report of suspicious activity. This young man was found on private property. The governor's gaze shifted to Mrs. Gable. And you are the one who made this report. Mrs. Gable, struggling to process the situation, nodded meekly. Yes, I saw him in my yard. I didn't know who he was, so I called for help. I thought it was the right thing to do. Governor Hayes let the silence hang for a moment before turning back to the officers. This is my son, Leo. Now, what evidence do you have that he was doing anything other than what he told you? Retrieving his basketball, she looked at Mrs. Gable. So, a 12-year-old boy chases his ball onto your lawn, and your first instinct is to assume he's a criminal and call the police. Mrs. Gable sputtered. I didn't know who he was. And kids like him, they don't just wander into people's yards. The governor's expression hardened. Kids like him, she repeated, her voice dropping, each word laced with ice. Please enlighten me. What exactly does that mean? The air grew thick with unspoken truths. Mrs. Gable's confidence crumbled into dust. Let me be perfectly clear, the governor said, stepping closer. You profiled a child. You made an accusation without a shred of evidence, and you stand here justifying it with a prejudice that says far more about you than it ever could about my son. The crowd stood in stunned silence. The governor then addressed the officers. I want this situation rectified, and I want it done by the book. My son deserves an apology. She then turned her attention to the entire neighborhood. Speaking not as a politician, but as a mother, she said, this isn't just about my son. It's about every child who is made to feel like an outsider in their own community. We all have a responsibility to see each other as neighbors first. Let's build a world where our children feel safe, not scrutinized. She looked at Mrs. Gable one last time. Think very carefully before you make an assumption like this again, because next time, the consequences might be far more severe. Mrs. Gable's face fell, the bravado gone, replaced by a deep and profound shame. The incident became a catalyst. Governor Hayes initiated community workshops on bias and inclusion. Leo, encouraged by his mom, shared his story at a school assembly, turning his fear into a powerful message of understanding. Mrs. Gable learned a painful lesson about the damage her prejudice could cause, one that would stay with her forever. What started with a single basketball rolling into the wrong yard became a moment of reckoning. A story about the power of truth, the courage to confront our deepest biases, and the hope that together we can build a community where everyone truly belongs.